Well, it's like when I hear the thump in the car when I'm driving
Yeah.
down, and so I just turn up the radio.
Yeah.
It's because I
Okay,
don't
and
want
for
to deal with
everybody
that.
listening, he gave that analogy pretty quickly. You're driving along and you hear a but
Yeah, it's pothole
Is
season.
turning up the radio the best way to deal with what just happened? Okay.
Well, I'm in a pothole, but you're making it sound like I hit a person. And if I hit a person,
You could have. Hey there. If you've joined the podcast today, my name is Chris Jarvis. I work with companies on employee giving and volunteering programs.
And my name's Jake McIsaac. I spend a lot of time thinking about public safety and restorative justice.
So we are having conversations here that we've been having for 20 years.
Yeah, the only difference now is we press record and share it with you.
Thanks for joining us.
On today's episode, I tell Chris a story about a guy who had to get out of the city, get to the farm, to just do some work. We dig into it a little bit around addiction and identity.
And from there, we explore purpose economy, diversity, equity, and inclusion lists, behavior modification, and the difference between lists that seek to tell you what behavior is accepted and lists that give you resources and insight into how to change your behaviors.
Chris, I was thinking this week about a story when we were volunteering in Halifax. At the Sunday supper, there was a guy, you'll recognize him. I won't say his name. We'll call him Bob.
That's the universal name. Yeah, Bob or Bill. Those are my two go-to names. Yeah,
Billy Bob.
Bill.
So let's go with Bob.
All right.
And I was thinking about how the time that folks from a local church really wanted to help Bob. And so they had this farm outside the city. And Bob was sort of unhoused and struggling with addiction and sort of a lot of things that would not surprise, but just a really great guy when you get a chance to hang out at the Sunday suppers. And so this group of folks decided, we got to rescue Bob. Let's get Bob out of the city, out to the farm.
Yeah.
Get him all cleaned up. And Bob thrived while he was at the farm.
Okay. And this is in Nova Scotia, and this was part of the work we were doing at, still known as the Sunday Suppers. I think it's been going since 1985, right? Okay. Yeah. All right.
So I was just remembering that when he came back to the city, how he had changed, and there was these few weeks when he was coming back around, and how well he seemed to be doing.
Right.
That I was shocked to learn just weeks later that he was found having broken into someone's house, actually one of the homes of the women who took him away.
Who made it possible. Yeah. Okay. And now I know who you're talking about. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Okay.
And it got me thinking about the value of getting away and resetting and relearning to navigate a world. Like there was a bit of an interruption there that is interesting to think about for Bob. Just wanted to think that through with you a little bit today.
Yeah, in terms of changing behavior and even perspective and how you perceive the world, it is kind of interesting. And obviously it makes me think of 12 steps, which, if you've ever done this kind of work before, and we brought it up in previous podcasts, there's this emphasis on new people and new places, because when you're hungry, when you're bored, when you're tired, these and a few others are sort of triggers for the old behavior. They're this, behavioral science would say, we're not really aware of why we make a choice A, B, or C. We rationalize it later, so it makes sense to us. But typically,
the hardwiring.
80 to 90% of our actions are just reactions to our environment, and they're known as cognitive biases. And there's about 180 of these that we use. And so it is interesting when you think about Bob, that's what we're calling him, right? Bob. And him following through on some of that, new places, new people, and kind of being in this place of serenity. Yeah. And then coming back to the old context. And then it doesn't take hardly any time at all, and those old behaviors reappear.
I wonder about sometimes the oversimplification of transformation, right? So when we
Right.
sort of sort of new place, new space, new connections, but what are we doing in paying attention to the conditions required for long-term success or sustained
Yeah.
change?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and so,
Sustained, like sustained pro-social, like the kind of behavior that you want to see in your life and others around you
yeah,
would want to
like
see. Like,
what would you need for that? And
right.
so when we do that kind of work, I know it's kind of taking one example and making it live somewhere else. So I want to be careful that I don't do that. But I've been thinking about that in terms of our diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility conversations. We hope for that too, right? So we go and we have these training sessions. It's like taking people to the corporate farm,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And we
Yeah.
take them out of their work
A
environment.
day and a
And you and I
half.
both do
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the conference room. Yep.
But then they come back from the farm. And I think they'll admit that they had a great time at the training session.
Yeah.
They learned new things.
Yeah.
It was kind of cool.
Yep.
So what?
Oh,
And
okay.
so what?
Well, that's a negative way to go there.
Yeah. But it's just
Well,
what?
the DEI specialist. So what? Who is
Yeah.
this Jake McIsaac fella?
But yeah.
But you're right.
I have those so what moments too when I do. Like
Right.
I will leave a really great event, and it's awkward when you're facilitating such a thing and driving away going, I wonder will that actually matter? I mean, it was a great
No.
afternoon, but did any of it take root? Will any of this make a difference?
Okay, now you sound like what we sound like. I realize we're talking about volunteering that is transactional. Great day out of the office. We had a great time. We feel good about it because we know we did something good.
Yeah.
But back in our original habitat, the ecosystem from which we sprang, if it's just transactional, you'll adopt the old ways of knowing and doing.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and this is for us the trick, and maybe this is an interesting thing to talk about. That 3-hour event out of the office did not provide individuals the skills they need to make meaning.
Right.
Meaning. I had an experience. What does it mean? What kind of meaning?
The sense making.
The sense-making process,
Yeah.
the meaning-making process. So there is no experience that you will ever have as a human being that is objectively this or that. It just, that's not how we experience the world. We all decide what something means. So I remember, I just mentioned this story the other day, and I want to get into the actual list of 12 steps because
Mm-hmm.
they do. It is a list, okay. And I know I'm tripping over my own wires here a little bit, but when you think of diversity, equity, inclusion, it can be easily become a list. And yet
Check
12 steps is
boxes.
a list.
Yeah.
Yeah, check the boxes kind of thing.
Yeah.
And we're not at this point, we're not saying that list is wrong. What I want to bring up with you is how 12 steps, which is a list of 12 things, can actually help. But if you reduce it like DEI to a
Mm-hmm.
list without understanding how the list is meant to be used to bring meaning to your experience, you're going to be a little bit like our friend Billy Bob, right?
Just for anyone listening who's not familiar, catch us up on what working the steps look like. What do you mean?
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, there are 12 steps. It's called the Big Blue Book. There's that's AA. Then there's NA, Narcotics Anonymous. AA stands for Alcoholics Anonymous. And then there's a whole lot of other versions. There's one called Overcomers, which is kind of a more Christian-based one. That is for NA and AA. And anyways, when I was in Halifax and when this event happened, around the same time as this event happened with Bill that you shared already.
Billy Bob.
Billy Bob.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I talked to somebody, and for those of you listening today, you're going to hear me maybe repeat some words or sound a little different. And I just want to explain, I have Tourette's syndrome. So my Tourette's is a little bit active today. So it will affect how I talk a little bit. Hopefully I'm not going to curse so we can catch that. But I think we were talking about 12 steps.
We're back to 12, yeah.
Here we go. So anyways, this woman came to me. She's very upset. And she said, I've got to talk about this problem I have. And I said, totally, this happens to me often. It's just a weird thing. I said, are you using marijuana? Now, this is a long time ago, before marijuana was legal in Canada, all across the country. This is back in 97 or 98. I don't know. And she said, oh my gosh, how did you know? Can you smell it on me? How do you know? I said, oh, no. I was just guessing. I didn't know. I said, but I tell you what, I know if you're feeling bad about it and you don't want to do it, you should go to a 12-step group. And she said, oh, I'm too scared to go by myself. I said, well, I'll go with you. And that was it. Boom. 2 years, almost every Sunday, went to 12 steps. And it was a big part of my life, working through those 12 steps. Phenomenal approach to not managing or controlling my behavior. Insights into why it happens and what I can do about it.
So in pop culture, there's been lots of references to these, right?
Yeah.
These moments. You'll see them in meetings, in movies, these 15, 30-second sound bites where someone's standing in some dingy basement of a church basement or community center.
Always.
And
really sad.
And people
kind
are
of full
gathered
of despair.
Around.
Yeah.
And there's a podium and someone walks up and says, hi, my name's Jake and I'm an alcoholic. And then they tell a story. Is it so pretty accurate?
Yeah. So there's no identifiable leader to 12 steps. There's no promotion. It's all anonymous, obviously. So you're not going to drive down the road. Other organizations may say, come to our service on this morning or come to this, or, there's this sort of growth mentality, like a private sector mentality to behavior management groups, maybe religious groups and that kind of thing. You will never see that with 12 steps. I mean, it is part of the rules.
So there's going down the street. There's no, it's promotion.
Universally understood, adopted. If you are dealing with, if you come to the moment, they call it if you've reached your bottom, which I know sounds strange, but if you think about yourself in an elevator, how far down can you go before you're so sick and tired of being sick and tired, you want to get out, and everybody has a different level. Like some people can go way, way, way down, and your disease, and that's obviously modern science has questioned the use of the word disease. But the idea is that this is an addiction, a set of behaviors that is trying to kill you. It's not conscious, obviously, but it's a set of behaviors that is self-destructive and will lead to your death.
Right.
The loss of all your friends, family.
And the loss of, just chaos.
Everything.
Absolute
just
chaos. Yeah.
And so 12 Steps says, this is how I understand it now. Let's acknowledge your behaviors. Let's work through why they're happening. What is the origination of your response to that trigger in the environment? Lots of friends and family come over. There's a little bit of fighting. First thing I want to do is go get a drink. Why? Forget about whether getting a drink is wrong or not. Let's just say, what's going on? Why is that happening? Understand it. Then you get to a place where you can say, is getting a drink going to be the best course of action? Is there another course of action? What are the other ones that you want to consider? And then moving forward. So I think it's kind of cool for mapping that out. And I think it does provide, a bit of a roadmap in understanding how to bring meaning to experience versus how most of us are raised, which is, I don't know.
It is interesting when you think through the steps. They're kind of broken down into this. It's this iterative process. So you're constantly working it. You get through, and you don't ever arrive. So you're just you keep processing each step, and so I'm just thinking about the role of one of the categories is you have to self-reflection. You've got to learn something about yourself. You have to rationalize something about. And that powerless moment that you're talking about, you've hit rock bottom, but you can't just stay there. It starts to give you steps to take to not be there. How do you rebuild these relationships? How do you reconnect with people you've harmed? How do you continue to understand your own moral failings, or this moral inventory they talk about? Like this, you have to process your behavior differently, and have this sense. If you can introduce this idea of personal failure, then you don't have to resist it as much, thinking you've got all your shit together, that everything's just great. So, which leads to ignoring the problem, right? It's like when I,
Yeah, it
it's
does
like when
because
I
it's
hear the thump in the car when I'm driving
yeah.
down, and so I just turn up the radio
Yeah.
because I
Okay,
don't
and
want to
for
deal with
everybody
that.
listening, he gave that analogy pretty quickly. You're driving along and you hear a but
Yeah, it's pothole
is
season.
turning up the radio the best way to deal with what just happened? Okay. Nothing
Well,
happened. I'm moving along as fast as I can.
I'm in a pothole, but you're making it sound like I hit a person. And if I hit a
You
person,
could have, yeah, right. An unconsidered life, you could have easily hit a pothole or a person, but you have a practice whereby you are not concerned with
right,
figuring that out, right?
right,
That's not the goal.
right,
Going back to DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, it feels like here's a list of how many people of color should be, or shades of color should be on your senior leadership. Here's what you should be doing. Here are the groups you should have. And it could easily be a list, but so could 12 steps. If it's not, if we allow people to use the list the way that's most comfortable, I'm going to avoid the first step. And so let me just reframe the
yeah.
first step.
Because guess what that would be like.
Yeah. Okay. So here it is with bias. Okay. I admitted that I was powerless over my own biases and that my life is unmanageable because I am not living a considered life. These biases, I'm just triggered by my environment and responding out of that. And I can't see it when it's happening. There's a level that is I don't want to be that person. I don't want to have those thoughts. I don't want to have those initial reactions. Um, that's a hard place to go. And I don't think most DEI efforts start with that because when they do, okay, you're probably going to say the same thing. Here's the reason you can't make people go to 12 steps. It has to be voluntary. The
Right.
moment you sit me in a seat
Yep.
and tell me you're an alcoholic is the moment I tell you to blank off,
Right.
get out of my way. I'm not going to be here. And everything you share from here on out is an attack on my identity.
Yes. That was
Which is
exactly
right.
where I was going. The role of
Yep.
an intervention, right?
Yep.
There is this alert moment where we use language in 12-step like, my name's Jake and I am an alcoholic. So I've
Yeah.
realized this about it. That is very different than everyone else in an intervention type space coming around
His name
saying,
is Jake and he is an
yeah,
alcoholic. He's ruining my
we want to
life.
let you know. And there were whole shows, right? The A&E
Right.
did a long series about interventions and they would show the chaos. They'd bring the family together and someone would say,
Oh, wait, what was that show? I never saw that.
intervention, A&E. Yeah.
Oh,
A
I'll
couple
have to
years.
go look that up.
Yeah,
Sounds
it was
stressful.
so okay. Yeah, it was.
It'll set off my Tourette's for sure.
It was emotionally charged, but it would give people language to describe what they were seeing. It would mostly for the families and the friends and those people who were being impacted in that chaos all around the person who was using. But it was this interesting moment where the community gathered around and they would just call the behavior for what it is. And it was really, really hard until the person who was listening got to that moment themselves and you could see the shift. So there was this, they had to orient to this new alert,
Yep.
right? They
Yep.
had to, you can see this moment sometimes, even on their faces, their expressions, the rigid body language, shoulders
Yep.
drop, they start to lean in and pay attention. And I wonder if the DEI version of that is, hi, my name's Jake and I'm a racist. Now, people
It
aren't
would
going to, right? It
no,
would
it
be.
would be.
It
Yep.
is that.
It would be.
But so then is the goal of training sessions or education or these experiences that we do to set the intervention? Is that what we're doing?
Well, okay, now here is the really interesting difference in my mind anyways, and I would love to hear from anybody with background in any of this stuff, or even if you don't, you've got an opinion, leave a comment for us about what I'm about to say. But it's this. Alcohol and alcoholism is not entirely embraced in society. In fact, we frown on it. There's a lot of negative around it. You shouldn't be an alcoholic. You're drunk. A lot of judgment words. It's not treated as a disease. Addiction isn't treated. It's criminalized in the United States. So it is a horrific thing for which we send people, unless you're a functional alcoholic, to prison. So there's a lot of functional alcoholics and the system allows them to stay operational. I totally understand that. I'm not here to talk about that. But when you get to bias, the system is quite willing to not only accommodate it, but reward it.
Right.
So bias
Yeah.
is fundamentally different than alcoholism in that the broader society operates using it versus trying to judge it,
Mm.
criminalize it, minimize it, don't want to see it. Bias, I mean, we can talk all we want about diversity, equity, inclusion, how implicit bias is what we're trying to deal with. To be fair, I don't think it should be criminalized, judgy, or anything. And I don't think addiction should be either. I think we should treat it as a disease and get medical attention for people in addiction. I think taking off the layer of shame gets people to a place where they can admit that they have an issue and they want help. Okay. We don't have that for racism.
Yeah, we do. We have human rights legislation. We
what
have
I
this
mean
list
is,
of rules.
yes. Okay. So that again, but I think you're making my point here in
Okay.
that what we don't want to do is see it overt or not implicit bias, but conscious biases.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
We don't want to see that. That does break us. But
I think it hasn't always. It does recently, right? So when we see it overtly, we touched on this a little bit.
Obviously, that's a good point to make.
Right?
Historically, this has only been a recent where we find it distasteful.
Yeah, so it's where we find it distasteful, and so when we find something distasteful, then we have to respond to it and react to it. And this is where sometimes the accusation is that we're just being performative in it. You don't actually find it distasteful. You just know that you have to respond to this.
Yeah,
we take a hard line against that kind of behavior here. Well, do you?
Yeah. So if you can't get somebody who's dealing with their alcoholism to deal with it by taking them to a room, telling them, here's why you're an alcoholic, here are the behaviors you're exhibiting, and here's the way out, that just 0.0000% chance of ever working, ever.
Mm-hmm.
Bias is the same way. You can bring people in and educate them about here's what alcoholism is, here's what the 12 steps are, here's what faces people, and all that information can be given to somebody and they can do something with it. But giving people the list and the definitions and all that information, while incredibly helpful, doesn't get them to a place where they're going to take step one, admit I'm powerless over my bias, any more than putting people in a room and saying, here's what bias is. Here's what implicit bias is. Here's how it hurts people, blah, blah, blah. That step does not get you to a place where you would ever stand up and say, hi, my name, unless it was just like part of the formula for the moment, or you've had your own personal issues. But you're not going to stand up and say, oh, based on this information, I'm quite willing to say, hi, my name is Chris and I'm a racist. Because I haven't had the experience yet where I think, holy cow, I think I am a racist.
Yeah,
you need that experience. You need that experience.
Walk us through that then, that alert, orient, act kind of formula, like you just said.
So it's a simplification of a description of how neural pathways grow in your brain. So this is all. So for all the behavioral scientists and neuroscientists out there, I apologize for how this is going to come across. Alert, orient, act is this simple way of just saying, look, when you have an experience that does not fit your expectation or it's new. So human beings only notice new things in their environment, and then we accommodate them pretty easily. You walk down the road, you see a chair floating in the middle of the street, you would go, now that doesn't fit my experience of the world. What is going on? You take a look, you spend some time, you talk to other people, blah, blah, blah. You're trying to make sense of it. That's sense making. How do you bring meaning to that experience? What does this mean? Because a chair floating in the street objectively doesn't mean any one thing, but it could mean a gazillion things to different people based on how they're viewing it and what their experience is. But after a certain period of time, oh, that's just a chair that floats in the street. We don't really know what it means. And you walk by because now you
can't hang on to everything.
No, my gosh. Can you imagine? Every new thing, I'd still be fascinated by my soother. What is this? So we can't do that, right? So it goes in the inventory of lived experiences. We have a category for it. It belongs there. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it doesn't, but we don't really notice it anymore. And so the alert moment is the initial moment where you ask the question, what does this mean? And in our work with transformative volunteering, we create conditions where people are almost invited, not forced, but invited to a place where if they don't answer that, it becomes very weird.
Mm-hmm.
So when we go to a soup kitchen really quickly, I tell people we're not going to make a dent in hunger or nutrition, and the poor are not a problem to be solved. We're not here as a bunch of white people, typically they are, trying to fix this community. That's not what's going on. They're instead, we've invited you here so they can give you their gift, which is to remember what your humanity is about. Thank you for being here. Now, I give a longer version for that, but that's the
Mm-hmm.
gist of it. And usually at the end of it, people will come up and say, well, I'm sorry, what? They're helping me?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Now you're open. You've alerted to what is going on and you're going to orient to it. You're going to decide what meaning you're going to bring to it every single time. Tony Robbins, and I mentioned this earlier in the call, but when he was young, he tells the story. He's told it a bunch of different times. When he's young, his dad, they were doing bad financially. His dad was very angry and ashamed. And one
Mm-hmm.
Christmas, somebody came by with a box of food and he blew up. See, this is where everybody knows it. My shame is public and I want to burn the world. He went into a rage, Tony says. Tony, on the other hand, is, oh, we're not alone. People know and we're okay. We're safe. The same experience, food dropped off at the house, two wildly different interpretations. So they alerted to it. This is different. What does it mean? They orient to it and act. This is how we're going to act in light of it. From that point on, Tony said, my life is about giving to other people what they need to survive and thrive. His dad, I'm not sure, but what the actual behavior was, but his behavior after he oriented, brought that kind of meaning to it, was a very destructive behavior for him and the family.
Mm-hmm.
And so that alert, orient, and act is how we describe neural pathways, looking for other neural pathways to connect to so that we can see the world differently. And when we alert to the moment, acetylcholine, that's the chemical that allows this neuroplasticity to happen. Not every time, but a lot of times. And then when we orient to it, that's when we either make the connection with the memory or the meaning, and we
Mm-hmm.
strengthen it by rehearsing it, like kind of just going over it and reflecting, which is something you mentioned earlier in the call as well.
Yeah. Just having it encoded, having that
Yeah.
revisiting it over and over. So
Yeah.
this is that kind of the working the steps then, right? So this is the constantly going back. So I think what you're saying is one of the takeaways that we could learn from a 12-step process is the fact that you continue to revisit, you continue to work these out, you continue to do this in community.
Yeah.
Um,
I think that's a really important thing. Sense making, we don't know what we think about something till we say something about it. And we can do that internally far better in a lived experience, which is why you said in community, 12 steps
mhm,
is not 12 steps on my own in a basement.
right.
Now you can do the work, you can journal. There's lots of stuff you do on your own, but you need to come to a group to help you process, to reflect and bring meaning to it from multiple shared experiences.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love the way that you work with groups too. It's not just on the event, but it's who they are together. Who do they want to be together, right? And so when you decide as a employee group what you're going to do, it's a deep reflection of who you are as a team, and then how it shapes your team going back. And so it is this keep going. And I have to think about those one and done then. Equity, inclusion, diversity training things. There's the gap again that we've talked about this. I think last season when we talked about the Starbucks incident, the danger of one and done versus continue to work the steps.
Yeah.
Okay, starting to make sense to me.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I know you have internalized a lot of this as well, and the starting to make sense is sort of an interesting connection for you because you don't, end up working with
Mm-hmm.
these companies and that kind of thing. So I'm going to give you one more thing to make an interesting connection. I want to see what you think, because in my work, the purpose economy or purpose driven is
Yeah.
huge right now in the private sector. I don't think most people know that it came from Christianity, Saddleback Church, Rick Warren, purpose driven church, hot stuff in the early 90s. Now it's the kind of purpose economy. If we understand our purpose and the role we play in making the world a better place, that's better than a mission or vision. None of that is untrue, but I think my worry about the emphasis on purpose is that it allows leaders to say, this is the direction and this is why we This is why we take that direction. So very clear on the why at company X we do this, and why we produce this product, and why we think this makes it the
This
world a better
missional
place.
approach.
Missional approach, but
Right.
we're going to avoid the word
Yeah.
mission and
Yeah.
I'll go the P word now, purpose.
Right.
The problem with purpose in my mind is that leaders are fundamentally architects of identity.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to put this in the show notes. It's this behavioral scientist who has a vast expertise in identity theory. And he says that a true leader creates conditions in space where people can live into the best versions of themselves and bring that to their personal life, home life, whatever it may be, right? But you have the tools and insights you need to orient, to alert to multiple things and then orient. So it's tools to grow and change. It's the same as the 12 steps versus here's our purpose, play your role, you're okay. Purpose, if that's all we do as leaders at a company, allows us to very easily accommodate our behaviors to the new conditions, a bit like Billy Bob coming back, having had a great experience, but then coming back in his own conditions. He ultimately found himself, taking on those old behaviors. And with purpose, you could as well, but you just get to call them a little bit different something. You're functional alcoholic in a way. I think purpose on its own is not enough. The same as DEI training on its own can never create the conditions whereby people change not their minds, but their brains. Does that make sense how I explain that?
I'm wondering about the leadership role and responsibility by title or rank. And so I wonder if what you've just described, is that only C-suite types, or where do common people within an organization say, like, I'm not the boss, but I have a small team of maybe 30 people that I'm responsible to and for in many different ways. How do I do it if I'm not the boss?
I know you're setting us up to actually ask this question, because if anybody else in my life asked me that question, I would say, I need to get you on a call with Jake McIsaac, because he whether he's going to be, prime minister of the country, or he's running a security department at a large university in Atlantic, Canada, he's still going to get people to a place where it's like, it's less about what you did. Okay, so you've told me multiple stories where somebody confronts somebody on the campus about doing something and they make a choice. And you said, I'm not here to question the choice you made. Just explain the principles that you worked through, that we've all agreed this is who we are, identity, and how that resulted in this choice. Right? I think you would say it much better than I just did, but I want everybody to know that you are a living example of, you don't need to have the job title to be able to be a leader who is an architect of identity.
Well, I appreciate that. It's very, very nice thing to say. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, then the answer would be, if I'm going to take a run at my own question, then
you like how I did that? I like,
the old flip it around.
Yeah, ping pong, boom, back at you.
Would be a principled approach. So the principles are there. So it's maybe another word. Maybe it's like the alliteration of purpose or something, but purpose and principles. And I think it's figuring out the who we are comes. It's rooted in principles and rooted in the. I can't tell you exactly what to do and how to do it, but I can tell you who we are together. And you'll have to figure out that. You're going to have to make those connections and then be able to articulate that and hang that on. So the principles become the scaffold for our decision making.
See, this is why I would send people to you. This is great.
Right. So
this is awesome.
So I'm just tracking along then. So leadership within an organization that's healthy and thriving and purposeful. These are leaders that are asking people to do this deep reflection around. I think what you're saying is deep reflection around, who do we want to be? It's not just what do we do together, but who we are together as we do it.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
And paying attention to those principles that, again, going back to the huge emphasis of the private sector purpose, that all works really well. if you do this principle as well. Here's the purpose we're taking on as this is our identity. And as this is our identity, here are the principles we make around decision making. That gets us far closer to the 12 steps are basically 12 principles, right? The first thing you have to do is admit you have no control. If we were going to bias the principle, the 12 steps, we would say, I've come to the conclusion I have absolutely zero control over my implicit bias, and I can't even see when it's happening. But I've also come to the point where I'm not a bad person for that. That I don't have to live in that there is, I have community and people around me that can pull me out of that. Then the next step is, so what am I going to do about it? I'm going to make a decision that I'm going to start to address these principles. Okay, what's the first decision? Okay, let me make a fearless and moral searching inventory. Moral, I probably wouldn't use that word, but I know what they mean by it. So I want to fearlessly and without shame look at the potential biases. Okay, so I make that list. I watch myself, how I'm behaving with others, with my daughters. Do I use gendering language with other people in the community? Oh my gosh, I saw an Asian person and this was a thought I had. I'm just going to make a note of that. It's a fearless inventory. I'm not afraid to notice my bias anymore because of my first step, because I admitted I have it. Then you go to step 6. I'm not going to do all of them. I'll stop with this one. And then we become ready to say, I'm ready to do the hard work to have these biases removed, to address them, to be aware of them. I'm not afraid of them anymore. And I'm going to go to my community and just say, hey, can you all help me with my shortcomings? This is step 7. I lied. I did another one. I'm going to go to my community and say, I've noticed these. It's not a shame thing. I just want to live out a different set of principles versus the ones I inherited from like a million years of evolution. So I'm just going to, I have done this with my daughters, right? I say you guys all the time. Am I hurting anybody? No. But the reason I've noted it on my moral inventory is that I want to be aware of every preference I have for male gendering in my language, because it's connected to something deeper inside of me that I want to root out. And so they help me. They'll just notice it. And you know what? That was months ago. So I now I say like you folks a lot. It's very folksy way to do it. But I think these are principles. They're not a list of behaviors that we don't allow in the office and a list of behaviors that we encourage in the office. There's a place for that list, but that list does not give me the tools I need to live a different life.
Yeah.
It just modifies my behavior to come out in ways that are not so socially unacceptable. I become a dry drunk. I'm still a raging addict and I am not sober, but I'm not drinking anymore. But for the way, anybody who has zero understanding of 12 steps, that is a big issue in addiction, to be a dry drunk.
Clean versus.
Yeah. Clean and sober means, I'm not drinking. Sober means, but I'm working the steps. I have intention. And I think we have a lot of clean DEI people.
Yeah.
And that is not a criticism of them. I think it's just, we're just learning this and we're just figuring it out. And fundamentally, if you don't hear anything else, and I know I'm going on here, but it is a voluntary journey. People need to have a moment where they think, oh my God, am I a racist? Because you can work with that. Telling people, oh my God, you are racist. Done. It's over. The conversation is over 90% of the time, more than that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, maybe you want to set it up by telling them that they're just layer it. Just don't stop at racism. Just layer everything in. That you're racist and you're a misogynist and maybe one of those things will land, and then they can you can
okay. To everybody, I just said I would call Jake. So this is why I don't, because you're going to get, it's 50-50 which response you're going to get. Okay.
That is true.
Yeah.
The people I work with most closely know this to be very, very true.
All right. So for those of you who are listening today, that here are my things that I want to remember, Jake, from this conversation. So I'm just going to call them out, and it'd be great. I'm curious to see which things are top of mind for you. Number one, living by principles is quite different than living by lists, even though on paper you could call them both lists, right?
Right.
Secondly, the choice to deal with my implicit or unconscious bias, or even my conscious bias, needs to be voluntary. Telling me I have a problem threatens my identity. I will resist anything that comes after that. Inviting me to have an experience where I ask the question myself is the only way forward. And for those of you who are listening, employee volunteering is not the only way to do that, but it is a great way to do that, because people will come to that space. And if we have intention and we just don't do something transactional, but we do something transformative and we create the conditions, you're an architect of identity, leading that. That's your job. And the future of the species is on your shoulders in some part, so don't screw it up. That's my takeaway. Over to you, Jake.
Well, you landed on the thing that I'm going to be thinking about quite a bit, is the architect of identity, and thinking about what are the conditions required for people to be able to do some of the other things that you mentioned about that. Mm-hmm. And to me, I mean, I started with that story of Bob, and I think about those folks now as a bit of an architect of identity. I mean, they were paying attention to what was required to get get to the farm, to create the space for this other work to be done, right? Yeah. So I have to think about where are the places and spaces I'm helping get people to the farm.
If we title this "Get People to the Farm," that is not going to work.
It won't work. We'll find something. We'll find some other line in this episode.
All right. Great talking to you, Jake. Thank you again for your time.
It's fun.
I like to think I'm sharing knowledge, but I always leave thinking I need to think more about that, or write something, or sense make. So now I'm going to try and bring a lot of meaning to this experience.
Yeah, same.
All right. We'll see you next time.
See you, buddy. Bye.
This has been a Podstarter production.